Okay. Bun. Good morning, because it is morning where I am, but it's afternoon where you are, because you're in
Well,
Bucur.
good morning. Transatlantically speaking.
Yes, exactly. I'm really delighted that you've agreed to answer my call to an interview. And I will just start with the basics, just to ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself, Sergiu Ruba. Where did you grow up? How was your childhood?
Well, I am born, first of all, in 1954. So that is a respectable age today. I was born in the very north of Romania, in northwestern side of Romania, in Transylvania, in the county where is the triplex confinium. So there is border with Hungary and Ukraine. It was border with the Soviet Union in the previous times. And I was born with a visual disease. So I never had a perfect view, perfect sight. But it was good enough to start to study in a mainstream school in a village. My parents were not villagers, but they had some jobs there. My father, for instance, was the mayor of the village. And my mother was the secretary of the school and the typist of the school in the same time. So I started in this village, and because I wrote later more novels, one of my novels translated into English under the title Blind Man's Light and subtitled A Summer That Never Sets. It translates perfectly the Romanian name of the novel. In this novel, I describe this very village. And for me, because I lost my sight a little earlier at 11 years, this village was practically the image of the world, or the picture of the world. I extended, of course, this picture and all its elements, but it was very important because it had a perfect image of the nature, surrounding nature, the landscape. It was a region with small hills, with small rivers, and forests. So it's perhaps not enough and not ideal for a child, but good enough to have a very active childhood and to have the possibility to run all over and see everything and touch everything in the surrounding area. This was my period in this village up to my 10, 11 years, but even later, because I went back to this village to my grandparents. They were there. But my parents moved to the capital of the county in when I was 10 years old. And starting with my 8 years, I was in a boarding school in Cluj, the unofficial capital of Transylvania, in Cluj, in a school for blind and partially sighted. This boarding school was very important because practically it was the shelter of our childhood in that period. So my childhood was spent in this village of my parents, where my parents worked, were employed, and later on in this boarding school in Cluj, and in the capital of the county in Satu Mare, city by about 110,000 inhabitants today and in that past. After my 11 years and after my 14 years, to be more exact. But as the school year lasted 9 months, a year of 12 months of a year, the major part of this time I spent in Cluj.
Cluj is your second home. That's what you are saying in a way. I mean, in terms of where you grow, or your third home after Satu Mare, I would guess.
Yes, it's true. There is a distance of 165 kilometers between the two cities. Satu Mare being to the north from Cluj. it was very important for me because it's a city very particular to this Central Europe. So very geometrically organized from the point of view of the network of the streets,
Yeah. Yeah.
and easy to be discovered by a blind kid.
Mm.
Because starting with my 12 years, I was able to walk and to go and discover the city. Well, not every day, but we had certain possibilities, opportunities to visit the city and the parks, first of all. Well, you know, at this age, you have very few targets. When you are in a boarding school, you go out and you go to the, first of all, in a park with some friends, some colleagues, or in, I don't know, to eat an ice cream, something like that.
So you were
And
simply walking around with your friends and discovering Cluj every day, or not every day?
no, it wasn't every day because we had a program of permission to go out of the boarding school. It was on Fridays afternoons and on Sunday afternoon. Only on Fridays and Sundays afternoons.
I don't think I've told you, but you know, I went to a music school in Romania, and many of my friends lived in the boarding part of the school because they were from all over the country in Bucharest. And they had a similar schedule of being stuck in the school, you know, because we also had to practice our instruments, and that was a lot of time. So they would similarly be able to come over to my house for dinner on Sunday afternoon. That would be the only time they got out of being in the. So I know like that life, not specifically for the school that you were, but for a boarding school for children that were very young. I mean, at the age of 8, you were by yourself. That's just sounds kind of amazing. How did that
Yes.
feel?
Okay, so I started at the age of 8 and 3 months.
Yeah.
Why? Because I'm born in October, so a school year started in September, and it starts now in September too. At my 8 years, I was in a hospital in Cluj with my mother, and there was some surgery interventions. So my eyes were not very perfect. I had some interventions, and the doctors advised my mother and my father when he came to visit me to inscribe me, to register me at the school for blind and partially sighted in Cluj. So to leave the mainstream, because in these conditions, I had the chance to protect my sight. So reading in Braille, working in Braille, learning in Braille, I had this possibility, and it was true. That's why the advice of these doctors, very intelligent, very clever people, my mother showed me the school where I was to go, and where I arrived in January 63. So after some months of study of that school year, January 63, but I was very easily integrated. They integrated very easily myself in the group of this school. And I started to be far from my family. But in a boarding school, well, as a kid, you have certain feelings, but later on, you realize that you are more independent as a blind man than at home. Because at home, parents have the tendency to overprotect you, to over shelter the kid, accompanying him to the school, accompanying, waiting for him to finish the classes at the school and accompanying him at home and so on. Here in Cluj, in my boarding school and out of this boarding school, I was really, perhaps not independent, but autonomous, a high rate of autonomy. It is very important for the future independence of a blind person.
You know, listening to you and thinking about your parents, Did you ever talk to them about sort of how they reached this very hard decision in a way as a parent to let go, to bring you there? I mean, did they tell you sort of who decided? Was one of your parents more in favor than the other? Do you know anything about that?
There were no other possibility because in the mainstream, it would have been very difficult for me
Yeah,
with my sight decreasing.
yeah,
So the standard of my sight decreased, and between 10 and 11 years, it was very, very, very low. And at 11 years, I lost it totally,
yeah,
and I was very aware of it. So it would have been very difficult. But in a school for blind, the advantage in those times were the direct access to textbooks, to writing means, writing instruments, and reading
yeah,
possibilities in Braille, and to all this um, gallery of means and equipments we
mhm,
had there. Well, we didn't start with Braille machines, but later on we had the Braille machines after, I don't know, at 10, 11 years. We started with the manual instruments to write in Braille, but we read in Braille and we had the textbooks. It was very important, not only the textbooks, but maps. So
yeah,
with tactile, we had tactile maps.
yeah,
The feature was tactile, and we had the possibilities to explore the map with our fingers. So we had these equipments and devices, didactical devices. And on the other hand, we had the teachers, they were specialized in working, in training the children. And the school was had children from the first form until the 12th form. It was the last form of the high school. So those were from 7 years to 19, 20 years. 20 years, but there were there even youngsters or pupils, students at other ages than the age of their promotion, because many of them lost some time or wasted some time, but well, had some time spent in hospitals, in treatments, and so on. It it is very clear from those who know the schools for the disabled children. Now, the tendency, the trend is for integration in the mainstream. There are countries in Europe having no schools for the blind, but in our opinion, in Romania, is that the choice must to be free for the child, for the young man, and for his parents, her parents, not to be obligatory in a system or in another. So to have the possibility of this choice.
yeah. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit more about the school. I mean, this is super interesting, and I'm putting up for those who can see also your books. When you're talking about your first book, I have that copy in English, and I have Semnatura Indiana, which is your most recent novel, and it's your Bildungsroman about that period with some really fascinating portraits of teachers and caretakers and peers that you had there. But if I could like get you to break it down a little bit more in terms of just numbers, sort of how many students were there, how many teachers or personnel that you interacted with, sort of how large was the school, if you could tell us a bit more about that.
The school had about 200
Hmm.
students from 7 years to 19, 20, 22 years. So the first form up to the 12th form. Uh, the primary school, gymnasium, as we used to call it in Europe, and high school or high secondary school. Well, teachers were enough teachers, and many of them were specialized in what is called today psychopedagogy. In those times was called defectology. Psychopedagogy, defectology was a Soviet term. In psychopedagogy and specialized in the education of the visually disabled. Because in psychopedagogy, there were more specializations. One of them was for the visual disability, the other one for the hearing disability, and another one for the mental retardament. And for students with problems of behavior and so on and so on. And these gentlemen and ladies came to this school. It was very important because they had a high level of education. On the other hand, you know that in all Eastern Europe, but in Romania particularly, the years 50s, the 50s were very, very hard. And there was a communist oppression, all directions. And some of the university teachers were marginalized before, after prison, or without prison, for political reasons. They were marginalized and sent to the school for the blind and the school for the deaf. So they were of academic level in the University of Cluj or other universities. And because they were members of parties that the communist regime had practically eliminated from the political life and prohibited all free political life. For these reasons, they were marginalized. And the marginalization was a chance for us, was a high opportunity because they were very clever people and with a high culture. And they treated us in a very particular and delicate manner. It was a chance for us, it's true. They disappeared due to their age by the beginning of the 70s, but many of us met them there. And on the other hand, they trained the students in the school who came back as teachers of the school. We had many blind teachers there, many. We had a important number of blind teachers. And for these blind teachers, they had an idea and an ideal. They told us, your chance in this life has two values to be targeted by you. One is the professional standard, your professional standard. You have to become a very good professional in your area. And the second one is culture. So don't leave this double way to reach these values and to have a good control of them, to become independent in these areas, to be a good professionalist, and second, to have a good cultural standard. So, and this was explained by the blind teachers, and they told sincerely us, our problem was the same and is the same as yours. It was like in a family, you know.
Yeah. So I keep thinking about, you know, other questions that I didn't even ask you about in my head, but they just pop up as you talk about your experience. In terms of culture, your book, Semnătura Indiană, the Indian signature, features a lot of conversations between you and some of those mentors that you had. I would call them mentors. Some of them were peers that were just a few years older, but had gone through some of the same experiences. The number of authors, the variety of people that you are reading makes me wonder sort of how rich was the library that you had? Who controlled sort of what was being translated into forms of reading that the students would have access to? Like, who controlled that set of decisions and generating of, you know, the material for you? Do you know much about that?
Yes, I know, but I don't know exactly the number of the books. The number was not very high, but it was enough for us. On the other hand, the decision to print in Braille and to tape on reel in those times the books
Mm-hmm.
with a vocal reading of the speakers was of the Association of the Blind in Romania. They had a studio in Bucharest. They had a printing braille workshop,
Mm-hmm.
and they printed the books in braille for all the country and sent these books to the schools and to the branches of the association. There were rooms for keeping these books. I was also president of the National Association of the Blind and know the situation very well.
Yeah.
Well, I was in after 2000. Um, so the library of the school was was built on these books printed in Braille in Bucharest, but also a printing workshop, a small printing workshop of the school. And if we needed some small books, for instance, fairy tales for the children, or other types of books, but not to be big ones, they printed them on the spot, so in the school and at the order of the teachers regarding our necessities.
Yeah.
Possibilities were not very generous, but we had these books and we accessed them according to our possibilities. And the reading, the audio reading, the hearing reading, the talking books were on reels. I repeat it, on reels, later on magnetic cassettes, and now everything is digitalized.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so you haven't said much about it until now, but I know from your Blind Man's Summer, Blind Man's Light, excuse me, the summer that never ends, that you speak many languages. You're a polyglot. And of course, you're also a writer. Um, how how did you become a polyglot? What sent you in that direction, and why did you become so interested in different languages and in writing? How did that come about?
There is a character in this novel of mine, Summer That Never Sets. Um, my grandmother,
Flora.
Floare, Flower, she spent 14 years in America, crossing the Atlantic to America and back, 4 times to America and 2 times back. She lived in New York and in Chicago and worked there. And my first foreign language was English. Well, English, perhaps 100 words, 112, 20 words together with the numerals or something like that. But it was very important for the kids in our village in the streets, because I used to ask the other friends, how do you call in English mer, so apple,
Yeah.
or leaf or tree or something like that. And I was the only one knowing these details. So my first language was English. And second, this village was half Romanian, half Hungarian. It was not Hungarian, it was German, but the Germans have lost their language. They spoke Hungarian. And we spoke both languages. So I started to learn Hungarian in games with my friends, in talks with my friends, and so on. It is a very difficult language. And starting perhaps from Hungarian, that's very difficult to learn and to speak. But for children who learn it on the spot, it is not difficult later on. I had a certain facility in getting languages, to say so, the all that language mean. And well, I don't speak many languages. I speak English and Hungarian, but the rest of the language are Latin languages, French, Italian, and Spanish. So together with Romanian, with the similarities in coincidences, with the grammar, there are many common points. We had a very good training in Latin in this school in Cluj. And it was an advantage for me because I started from Romanian and Latin.
Mhm.
I was very well trained in French in during my schooling in Cluj, and I was able to learn Italian and Spanish. It is very difficult with Portuguese because Portuguese has a very special way of pronouncing words. It's not a problem for me to understand the Portuguese text when I read it, because I understand it through Spanish, via Spanish, but to speak Portuguese is very difficult. They have the tendency to supreme vowels, and it makes the words very difficult to get, to clarify. Okay, so this was the start, and this was very important with this grandmother, because I realized late in my life that my abilities, many of my abilities come from this grandmother. First of all, the languages. Second, literature. Why? Because fiction. Because she was a famous storyteller. And she had two types of stories for us, for children. First of all, stories with America, and second, stories with ghosts and something like that. Not exactly ghosts, but kind of night souls going up and down all over the world, and looking like little sparks and little lights, little flames, walking flames, running flames, and so on. And these stories were very interesting. I preferred every time the stories with America. She was in America at the beginning of the 19th century and told us things I couldn't ever imagine. For instance, she told me that, well, to America, there is so much water that is only water. So it was for me an image of infinite, because she realized that the crossing the Adriatic Sea, the Mediterranean, and the Atlantic, for her, the travel was very long, and she, who never saw other things than the surrounding plains and hills, all of a sudden met the sea.
She's
Infinite
a
sea,
character.
infinite.
She's a
Yes.
character. She's phenomenal. You were very lucky to have somebody like that in your life, for sure. But of course, the surrounding. I mean, as you talk about it in your blind man's light, the surrounding area with its sort of multicultural reality of different religions, different languages, different traditions coming together. You sort of lived in a salad bowl of Romania, basically, with all the varieties of possible cultures around you, even in a small village. It's kind of phenomenal because, well, you don't have that sort of variety in other small villages that I'm aware of in many places.
Anyway, you can find her name in the documents, the papers, the files and folders of ellisisland.org, O-R-G, where I found her name as passenger of the Pannonia ship coming to Ellis Island in 1906, and later on Caronia ship reached in Ellis in 1913. There were 22 million of immigrants in America between 1900 and 1920. And my grandmother, with her name, is there, mentioned 2 times.
That's amazing. You're part of a very special history, I guess, through her. And the stories about Chicago, I have to say, are fantastic, really funny. I laughed out loud reading that part. I love Chicago, and it's a very vibrant place full of immigrants from everywhere. And she certainly added a lot of flavor with her personality to the big community there. Let me ask you more directly. I mean, you spoke about your experience in the school for the blind. and partially seeing students. But more broadly, how would you characterize the experience of being a blind person in communist Romania? I mean, you clearly had some fantastic opportunities that were generated obviously by your parents who chose to send you there, but also the availability of that school. But that was a very small percentage of the total population. So speaking more broadly, I mean, do you feel like you were lucky, privileged, or was your experience kind of a average experience of somebody who was blind growing up in Romania at that time?
Well, I was lucky only from a point of view. You had a very interesting atmosphere there in that school, because we had the same problems and we never were unhappy, even if we had the feeling we are not free with this program every day. We had no possibilities to have to play as the other played out of this kind of institutions. But my starting point for the Indian signature, the autobiographical novel you have mentioned, was another one. So I was very fond of literature and of poetry from my early childhood. With his grandmother, I was used to read and to listen to stories. And starting with my 11, 12 years, I liked very much poetry. And when I was 17, so in 1971, the communist leader of the country, Ceausescu, decided a censorship program. So Romania up to 71, many of those who knew it from so citizens and others who visited the country used to tell that it was a very free country compared with other socialist communist countries. And after implementing or starting, so deciding this censorship, I was very dependent on the radio broadcasts. All of a sudden, everything was cut down, so was stopped. And I know very exactly that my colleagues from other schools, or my friends, the able-bodied, typical ones, were also very sad about this decision, not only sad, but very against. They felt a kind of revolt, because the movies coming from the Western countries, or Romanian movies, but those coming from the West, were prohibited. All were prohibited. And I felt immediately to be isolated and in a certain way blocked down, imprisoned somewhere in a very wasteland, in a desert place. And I was very uncontent about. I wrote a letter to Radio Free Europe in Germany. Well, it used to broadcast from Munich in Germany. And to write this letter, I dictated it to my sister, who was 13 years old. The letter was captured by the communist authorities, and I was submitted to a certain investigation by the secret police. And well, how I was treated, well, I was very frightened, of course, by all this inquiry. But on the other hand, they knew very well that I had no possibility to activate out of this boarding school. I had some friends in the city, in some clubs of the students who dealt with literature. but I had these friends, but I had no other connections because we are very interested in who is with you, who are your partners, who used to think as you do, and who used to protest against. It was very easy for them to reach the conclusion that I had no links, I had no connections, other connections, and other partners or other, well, and in this, after some investigations, they gave me the impression they are not interested by me. But well, finally, my impression was that they intended not to let me to go to university in Cluj. And it was very easy for them to do that because the exams of access in universities in those times were very difficult. You had to write work in your specialization, your specialty. It depended, for instance, I intended to study French and English, and I had to write works in French and in English in different sessions. It was very easy for them because after writing these works in Braille, they were transcribed in the normal writing, in ink print, as we used to call it, in ink print, and well, secretized, of course, because the works were not signed, corrected, and I would have been very easy to be eliminated or eliminated therefrom. Well, that's why I left Cluj and I went to the University of Bucharest. It's my story of this novel, it's true. I cannot say the communist regime was very threatening. So they threatened me in their way, but there were no violent behaviors from these representatives of the power in the communist regime. And in the school, I was rather protected than abandoned by the teachers. Finally, I abandoned the city and I reached Bucharest, at the University of Bucharest. And after this city changing or city break, I didn't feel I was prosecuted by them. So I didn't notice any investigation or any research, any interest of the secret police regarding me.
Yeah, but you did, I mean, you say that you were not physically threatened, but you do tell a couple of stories in the novel about being taken to this place that was apparently that of the secret police, and at least one person accosting you and picking you up and making you feel like they were going to drop you down some stairs, right? I mean, there were some physical threats, actually.
Yes, but not violences. I was also aggressed by a lady, a doctor.
Yeah.
Well, but my fright was enormous because I was very frightened. First of all, I didn't know where I was accompanied and when I was carried in their cars,
Yeah.
for instance. So I was unable to realize where I go. Where do they accompany me, and where do they want to um, leave me, to leave me there? Or well, I didn't hope when I was there in well, I'm sure now that I was in the social center of the secret police, but I didn't know in those moments if I'll be accompanied back to the school or in another place, in a hospital, in a prison, I don't know, back to my family. I didn't know anything. And this way of threatening and frightening people was an art of the secret police. There were not violences against me because I was very easy controllable by them. So I was under their control. I was in a boarding school. It was not a problem for them to control me and to control all the school, all the staff there, and all the students, to know everything about everybody, because they have contacts. After my investigations, they started to have contacts in the school, and there were people who reported them what happens there. Be sure of it.
Yeah.
But yes, it was high trouble in my life, in my teenage.
Right.
Be sure of it. But let me be sincere, as I have mentioned in my book, my revolt was sincere. See, I don't know, perhaps other guys or girls of my age would have thought and reflected more than me. I didn't reflect it very much. I decided to protest. And it was my way to protest. And I don't feel any sorrow for having protested. And I realized later, and not later, in those times, that this event practically changed my life, because I moved from Cluj to Bucharest. And well, there are 500 kilometers between the two cities, but another element is very important. I came to the University of Bucharest, to a bigger city. Well, Bucharest has and had 2 million inhabitants, Cluj only 300,000. So the difference is important. And I was able to manage the map of this enormous city. So I never lost my bearings in Bucharest. Well, I lost my bearings, but I was able to move independently in Bucharest. It is a very important experience for a blind man in such a big city, because you depend on many elements, you depend on many influences and on many connections. And finally, I was able to become independent in Bucharest, and it gave me much confidence in my abilities and my possibilities. And in Bucharest, I found a job. After finishing my university studies, I find immediately a job in the School for Blind and Partially Sighted of Bucharest, teaching their French. I taught French for 12 years in this school. Later on, I worked in the Ministry of Education, dealing with the schools and the education of the visually disabled in Romania. And in this positions, or from this position, I was able to establish 4 units, 4 schools. 2 were re-established and 2 were established for the first time. It was important, and I started the reform in the area and the implementation of the technology in the schools with imports from Denmark, from Germany. Well, there were imports, there were donations. There are many activities and many actions in this direction. It was very important for the schools. And on the other hand, we have started the integration of the blind in the mainstream schools, in a policy of the Ministry of Education and of the community of the blind.
When did this happen? Can you tell me a little bit more about the 4 schools? This happened in the 1980s or after 89?
No, it happened, the 4 schools were re-established in 1990, 1992, and 1994. In 1990, were re-established 2 schools. My high school in Cluj was cancelled by Ceausescu. So
at what point
not due to me.
At what point in time was that closed down? Do you remember?
It was suspended, so it was reduced at a school of 8 forms. The high school was cancelled in 1983. And in 1990, I have reestablished this high school in Cluj. On the other hand, Ceausescu in 78 cancelled all training in postgraduate schools. So after the high school, there were professional postgraduate schools of 2 and of 3 years. And the blind had one of physiotherapy in Bucharest. This school was cancelled, and I have reestablished it in 1990. Well, I was the agent of this reestablishment, but I was helped and widely supported by the staff of the Ministry of Education in 1990. In 1992, we have established a new high school in Buzău, in the city of Buzău, and in 1994, a postgraduate physiotherapy school in Arad, in the west side of the country. It was a distribution in more cities of the country to have this possibility of to offer to the blind and partially sighted the possibilities to go to these units close to their regions, for instance. So the physiotherapy schools were in Bucharest and in Arad. The high secondary schools are in Cluj, in Bucharest, in Buzău, and now in Timișoara.
Oh. Well, that's very exciting. I wonder if we can stay a little bit more with the pre-89 period. So, okay, in 1978, the decision to close down these post-secondary educational or professional development opportunities for the blind happens because you know what the reason for that was? Was there a sort of a new policy or a Ceausescu related sort of thing?
It was a policy. He cancelled all the postgraduate schools in Romania and invented the professional high schools. Yeah. So practically the level of professionalization of professional training was decreased, and it started earlier. So when you graduate a high school, you are 18 or 19 years old, and you are mature enough to start training of 2 or 3 years and become a professional in many areas, not only in medical assistance, but in communications, in technology, in telephony, in I don't know what, in commerce. He cancelled all this training at this level and sent this training in the high schools with technical and professional orientation. Sanitary schools, economic schools, and so on and so on. And at the university level. So but it was a general policy of the regime.
But the consequences seem to be very specific for instance, you know, a category of people who have a specific type of profession that they can follow, but not many others, such as the blind, right? So that means that those specific institutions that enabled you and others to have a basically a professional path to economic independence were being cut completely.
No, they were transformed in other kind of units. So I repeat, the training starting at 19 years up to 21, 22 years in a professional area, was sent to start at 15 years in a high technical schools, technical high schools.
But did those technical high schools exist for the blind?
Yes, they started with the sanitary schools, so-called sanitary high schools.
Right. Okay.
But I don't recommend to train a blind in physiotherapy and medical massage at 15 years. Right. It is against evidence. It's obvious. You have to you need a certain mature development, first of all, of your body, and second, of your brain, because you work with people.
Yeah.
And you work with people in certain difficulty. You have patients. It's a medical treatment.
Right. So the kind of professional development that was envisioned just did not correspond to the actual developmental stage of the people going through it, is what you're saying. Not particularly useful.
Yes, 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 but well, it, um, there were also youngsters who, at 19 years, were able to become a specialist in this area. But it is recommendable if you have a look on this area. I'm sure you agree with me. You cannot be a medical treater at 18 years, 19 years.
Right. I understand.
You need a certain responsibility. And this responsibility is better to be developed and to be well in connection with patients and with other medical staff when you are a young man, as a youngster, 19, 21, 22, 23 years.
Yeah, when you're frontal.
Coinciding with the first years of a student in medicine.
Right. It makes sense. How would you describe the assistance provided by medical professions before '89 in the area of the kinds of disabilities that you had? It sounds like there was good training, in fact, and that you were served well by many people. But do you agree with that assessment, or was it uneven? What can you say about that?
Well, we had good contacts with the oculists, first of all, regarding our disability. And as far as I have told you, the advice to be orientated to the School for the Blind came from these specialists, from the ophthalmologists. And the schools and the Association of the Blind had good contacts with the doctors. On the other hand, having many physiotherapists among the blind men, well, men and women, they had good contacts with the medical professions in our country. But from another point of view, with the care, it depended on the situation and on the very situation of the person and of the unit, school or working place. So there is no rule in this area, but what can I confirm is that the relationship with the oculist was very good, and it goes on being very good.
That's reassuring to know. So I want to thank you for the pre-1989 interview. We're gonna pause, and there will be a second part, which I will recommence with you in just 1 minute here. So let me complete this, and then we'll move on.